Okay, so I want to do a video discussing the perils of phase, particularly in regards to recording drums. I have here a track that I did, multiple tracks. I've got 3 overheads, hi-hat, a couple room mics, 3 kick drums, top and bottom snare, and 2 toms that I think I hit only a couple times. And I've sort of manually gated the toms because I use C214s for toms, and they sound great, but they pick up a lot of cymbals. And so I like to manually remove the stuff that goes on while they're not actually being played, which can be an adventure in itself if you have different things going on, but that's for another video. So that's it for the toms, right? Yeah, so I recorded this quite a while ago, and since I recorded this, I have discovered the wonders of phase and how it can drive you absolutely insane, especially when you're using room mics and you're hearing different things, and it can get kind of confusing. I've got when you get into the mixing, you're trying to get to the final stage of things, and you think by adding plugins and doing this and doing that, it's going to make it sound better. It's got to come from the source, and with drums especially, try and get your phase 100% before you even start. And we'll see how close I can get. I know I get it better than what it is right now, because I didn't really know what the hell I was doing back then. Okay, so let's just listen with everything on the way that I had it. I don't know if these levels are exact, but you'll get the idea. What are we doing here? All right, and a pretty big giveaway for phasiness is cymbal swirl. Like check this out when I hit my cymbals. You can sort of hear that phasey kind of thing. And the cymbals that I'm using, they're UFIP fast crashes, and they sort of have that kind of vibe, like trashier Chinese type cymbals kind of have that vibe too. They have sort of like a swirly kind of thing. Depending on your mic placement and stuff like that, that can affect it. If you put your mic in the wrong spot where it's sort of sitting, where the cymbal's moving above and below the capsule, you can get that wavy kind of thing if it's right on the edge. But, overall, like this sounded pretty good. If I turn off my drum verb, which is a lexicon, and it's a pretty serious, like, delay kind of verby thing, like a slapback delay. I don't know, you're playing in a cavern or something like that. So if I turn that off, and this is the kind of thing that kind of, you add stuff, and then you kind of lose track of the phase problems. Right, and so that's without it, so it cleans it up, like it makes it a little bit more focused, and when you add it, it actually definitely sounds more refined and more pro, etc., etc. Let's check out my room mics here. And I've sort of I've got them crushed with a 1176 So let me remove that stuff. And I have like a low ceiling room. It's only like, it's pretty low, but I've got my room like totally dead. So I'm using other things to try and make my room sound bigger on my room mics and stuff like that. Ocean Way sound, like room simulator, that kind of thing. So let's kill the room mics and let's see what it sounds like. And so, if you have room mics and stuff like that, and you want to be focusing on phase, like kill your room mics. Let's see what it sounds like without the room mics and without my crazy lexicon reverb. All right, so that sounds a lot better, but I still have the swirlies happening, right? And like I said, my cymbals sort of have that swirly sound anyway, but so if I'm starting from here without my room mic, because when you put my room mics up, it sort of adds another layer of this and that, and room mics sort of add a little bit of, phasiness to it as well, just because it's a distance away and it creates like a bigger, because phase is sort of like, well, it's not sort of like, it's signal going through a wire telling your speakers to go forwards and backwards. And ideally, to have the most punch and power and focus, you want both speakers, if you're, in stereo, to be going in the same direction at the same time, and then backward, like forward and backward, in sync. If one is going forward while the other one's going backwards, that's when you get problems. And in mono, what winds up happening is the speaker doesn't know what to do. So it just like any of those frequencies that are being told to do things at the same time, like go forward and backward, it just cancels out. You don't even get it. And that's why you get your phasing issues. So there's polarity and then there's phase. And what I'm going to be starting with is polarity with my overheads. And like polarity is, if I'm talking into this vocal microphone here, as my voice pushes into the capsule, it pushes backwards. And so it's going in a certain direction. If it was being sucked forward, it would be going in another direction. And you can reverse the pins on your microphone cable, or you can reverse the phase on your preamp, and it reverses that thing. So when the capsule goes in, it wants to go out, kind of thing. Like it does the opposite. And so the first step is to start with polarity. And the best way to know what is actually happening if you're recording in a DAW, well, this is the best way, period, anyway, is to look at your waveforms. And I went to the trouble of, aligning my microphones the best that I could. What's this first hit? A snare? So that when I hit my snare drum, all three mics were happening, were pretty close. Now, I had the idea, but I didn't get these exact. These are pretty close. I was using cattails on this song, which are Headhunters. They're sort of like blastics, but they got beads on them. So they do make an interesting sound. They're not like playing with a stick or anything. So what I like to do, this song wasn't really done to a click. I was just playing along with a track. So if I was actually playing along to a click, I'd try and, pick the thing that was the closest to my click on average to line things up with, which would be my mono overhead or possibly my kick drum. But I like to line things up with my mono overhead. And my mono overhead is set up on a cross angle with my drum set. See if I can do an overlay of a photo here, wherein it's on a bit of a diagonal, and it's cutting down the side of the kit. And what just happened here? Is everything still going? Yeah. And hopefully this still works, because apparently it doesn't like arrow or non-arrow. I guess my computer is like, no, you're killing me. Yeah, what was I saying? I was talking about mono overheads. So I use the mono because it's in line with the bass drum and the snare drum, and it's both getting it's getting both of them at the same timing, the kick and the snare at the same time. I like to use this as my center, because if I just solo my mono overhead, oh wait, sorry, that's not centered. Hang on, or I soloed. There we go. And this was like a 421, I think. Now I'm using a different mic, but this was a 421. And it's a pretty accurate representation of the kick and the snare. And, you know, you can move it around to try and get more kick or more snare, depending, you know. But this is the center of the sound. And so what I'm going to do is take a look at, make this my reference point for everything. Now, the other thing I'm doing right now is I'm looking at my waves. And I'm looking for which direction they are going. And these three are looking pretty good. They're all in the same direction, the overheads. They're all in the same, they're all going down, up. So, but my right is a little bit off. So what I want to do is I want to move the right over a little bit. But I do hear that there's a tambourine in there. So I just want to do that with a snare drum hit that's just by itself. And the idea was that when you hit your snare drum, you want it to come through both speakers, or like the left and right and the mono at the same time. So I believe this is just a single snare hit, right? Yeah, so we'll line it up with the very first hit here. And so you can see my right is a little bit off. My right, and what that means is that my overhead left is pretty much the exact same distance away from my snare as my mono mic. And this one's a little farther away. So I'm just going to, okay, this is the beginning of the song. So I can't drag left. So what I have to do is I'll just cut the beginning of this off a little bit. Oh, come on. What? Hang on. And delete these guys. So now I have, if I have to move something left, I'll have the wiggle room. Typically, you're going to be moving things right. But in this case, I've got to move things left. So let's do that again. I'm going to make this guy here my center. So I'm going to move this one left a little bit. I'm going to move this one right a little bit. So now, like when I hit my snare, it's going through both overheads, all three at the same time. Right. And when you use a technique like this, where you have the three mics, well, if I pull out this mono mic, you can really hear that there's a wide thing, but it's not very focused. It's kind of like a little wonky, but when you turn this guy in, it centers everything really well. And for me, I find that I want them around the same volume. I don't want this to be really loud or really quiet. I might like do that a little bit. Just get rid of a little bit of the top end. Anyway, I'm just refining this as I go. All right, so those are my overheads, and my mono mic is going to be the center of the world, and you're going to see that it's a little ahead or a little behind these two guys, depending on what you're hitting. I'm using my snare drum as my reference point, but if I hit my floor tom, because it's on the right side of the kit, the overhead right is going to happen a little sooner than the overhead left. If I hit my hi-hat or crash cymbal in the left, the overhead left is going to be, you know, a little sooner than the mono mic, just because it's the distance away. But we're trying to focus just the kick and the snare. And, you know, in this case, I use the snare to balance stuff. Okay, so, and if you put your overheads in the right spot, then you're Gucci. You're good. All right, so now, as we go through my waves, we're going to notice up, down, up, down, up, down. My hi-hat looks good. It's up, down, right? Let's move that over a little bit. Actually, well, no, let's not. Oh. What just happened here? Oh, man. I don't have access to, do I have history? Nope. I think when I switched the, oh, there we go. Undo move history. There we go. Okay. Okay, so hi-hat 1 that I wanted to get rid of, yeah. I want to actually find a hi-hat hit, which is really hard to do, because if I move the snare drum hit, that's not going to work. So I think the closest I've got is this tambourine that was attached to my hi-hat. So I'm going to move this over. And these are, you know, pretty, yeah, I think maybe something like that would probably be okay. It's not going to make that much of a difference. But if you're playing a track, whether you're playing a solid hi-hat line, you can move that. You can find a single individual thing and move that and line that up, and that'll be tighter as well. You could, you know, just try and get it. And it's mostly that you want your snare drum to be in phase if there's bleed. That's sort of what it is you want the snare drum to be tight. So that's looking pretty good. And then my rooms, I don't really touch, but let me check my phase on them. Let me find that first snare hit, because when you start playing the kick and the tambourine and stuff at the same time, everything goes through kind of weird. So that's looking good. That's down up. Those are fine. Now, because they're room mics and they're farther away, I'm not going to line them up, because that's part of the vibe of room mics. You're getting a delayed sound. As long as they're both the same, then you're cool, right? It's not like your feature thing is the room mics with a kick drum, and they're out of, you know, that's not my feature thing. But as I go through my kick drum, I discovered hell, and I don't know how. Oh, so this is a snare drum hit, so there's no point in lining that up. Let's just see. All right, so let's look at my kick drum hit. This is my kick drum hit, and as you can see, up, down, up, down, up, down. And let me just find a single. This is kind of tricky because I'm playing all three at the same time. Okay, here's one here. All right, so this will be a good indication of what's happening. Yeah, up, down, up, down, up, down. So I don't know how I managed to do this. I'm an idiot. But all three of my kick drums are out of phase with my overheads. So the first step I'm going to do is I am going to reverse the phase on all three tracks. And this was done in one take, so yeah, it's just as simple as that. If there was more takes or if there were edits or whatever, you'd have to select everything that you're doing and then flip it. Now, the other way that you could do it is if you have preamp stages, you can hit the phase buttons, right? Now, by doing this, I'm going to put it back to the way it was. If you have certain plugins, like this plugin, the 1073, has a phase switch on it. Like if you have channel strip sims, that can be another way to do it. I personally like to, now that I'm into the zone of phase land, well, I like to physically just do it, right? And then what I like to do is take my kick drum and move it up next to my mono overhead and line them up. Let me go back to that first individual kick, because there's no crash on it or anything. So now this is what's interesting. Oh yeah, no, I flipped them. That's why they look good. Anyway, so here's my mono overhead, and I'm just going to drag all three of these over so they line up with the beginning of that. Boom shakalaka. And then that. And then that. Right? And so all three of these mic, this is the inside of the drum, this is inside the hole of the front of the drum, and this is on the outside skin of the drum. And, you know, because they all have different timings and different distances, they're all going to be a little out. So I just moved all of them, and I made them tight. And let's take a listen to this now. So it's sounding better. Let me put them out of phase again. This is what I had. Now it's kind of weird. Like, yeah, I'm using headphones, so I don't have any mic bleed, you know, when I'm doing playback. But I have a hard time actually hearing the difference. Like, I'm not really hearing that much of a difference. Let me try it again. Right here is where it should be. It should be in phase like this. But I'm not really hearing much of a difference. And the problem was my snare drum. Let's look at my snare drum hit. My first snare drum hit. The problem was that I don't know how I managed to do this. Well, I do know. I mean, I have some custom preamps, and some of the friggin' wiring was backwards. Either that or my cables or whatever. It just sucks. So these are also up down. So not only was all three kick drum mics out of phase, but both my top and bottom snare are out of phase, and the top should be different than the bottom when you're actually tracking. So I got the bottom in the right phase because you're supposed to flip the phase of the bottom. But actually, this is backwards too. Everything is as backwards as you could possibly get it, which is like, I'm an idiot. I don't know how I managed to do this. I'm so glad that I figured out the land of phase. So even though I fixed the kick and my overheads are good, and my room mics are good, and my hi-hat's good, and I haven't looked at the tom mics yet, but I'm pretty sure they're good. it still sounds not great, and that's why I couldn't really hear the difference, right? So, once again, this is one track, so I'm just going to select those two. I'm going to move them over to here, so they're lined up, and then I'm going to flip the phase. Phase reverse. And then while that's happening, I'm going to drink coffee and wallow in my shame. Okay, so now let's see what this sounds like. This is what we had. Now I hear a difference. Now it's pretty prevalent. So if I put these out of phase, this is what I had originally. So I'm doing this, and my kick drum gets a little better, but I can't really tell the difference. But all of a sudden, now there's more focus on the snare drum, and it feels like there's more weight and bottom and solidity to the kick drum. Like it feels like there's extra bass has been turned up. And now you can hear. Yeah, it's still hard to tell with a kick sometimes. It depends, I'm using headphones. Depends on your speaker setup. Depends on what's happening. Let's listen to the snare in phase with the overheads and then the bass drum out of phase. Yeah, that sounds way more focused. I don't think I could have made that worse. Well, I could have made it worse. But now it's better. So that's much better. And then let's find my toms. Now, I do find that toms are not as big a deal, especially when you do this gating kind of thing, the manual gates, like cutting out stuff or using gates. Let's first check the phase. Down, up, that's good. And down, up, that's good. Both of those are where they should be. And, the tricky part with this, I mean, you could, I guess if you're using the mono mic as your center, the 421 that I was using isn't the greatest sounding mic for what now I've switched to a ribbon mic, and it's much better. But you can see that the Tom 1 has happened before the two overheads, so this is a little bit out of phase. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select both events, and let's listen to it before I move it. Let's do a loop. A loop. Alright, that's what it sounds like before. I selected both, right? Because I've got edits, I don't want to do them. I want them to be both moved at the same time, the same amount. So everything's cool. And I'm going to line them up with my mono. And that also lines it up tighter with the both overheads. So let's see. Oh yeah, and then I got to do this one. And I'm not grabbing both toms at the same time because they're both like different distances from my mono overhead. So, and that's it here. So this one's a little bit there, and then I'll just move it over. So let's see if that sounds any tighter. I think it does. I think it does. It's a little better. And it doesn't drastically change the difference of the sound or this or that. Once you have the polarity makes a big difference because you're going to get full-on phase canceling. But moving drum hits around and stuff like that so that they line up just gives it more focus. It's sort of like you have more snap and more presence. All right, so this is what I started with. You can really hear that snare change. Right? And, you know, now if I throw my rooms in, hopefully it'll sound better. That's what I started with. All right, now if I add my So there you go. That's a full, super long-winded tour of the joys of phase. And yeah. And then, you know, I mean, these two are not going to be the same. Like I'm lining stuff up relative. I guess I had a flam going on there. Yeah. Little flammy flam action. Oh, I got that one right. Almost. Now, nothing's going to be perfect, but the idea is to line it up for me with my mono overhead. Now, if you're just doing a stereo pair, measure these equidistant from each other with the snare. I'll try and put an overlay on top of this so you can see. Recorder man technique's a good way to that type of thing. Like you take a cable, a mic cable or a string, and you measure off from the capsule to the snare drum. And you could do a triangle between the kick, the snare, and the capsule. And as long as those three are like the same distance, you know, that's a really good start. And then, you know, when you hit your snare or you hit your kick drum, ideally in a perfect world, they are both happening at the same time through both overheads. If you use stereo XY, that works really good. That eliminates it. And then so your kick drum would be lined up with both of them kind of thing. But the idea is to get everything as tight as possible with your overheads. The room mics doesn't matter so much. I mean, we can play around with where the room mics are. Let's see. I've never done that before. That's where the mono overhead is. Let's see what happens. See if it gets if I go like this. wish I had an easy, because when they put it in basic mode, move undone. Oh, room there. Okay, so I moved it. This is okay. This is the before. The after. I don't think it makes that much of a difference, but it actually almost seems a little bit more focused. It's kind of weird. So you could play around with that kind of thing, depending on where you want it to be. It's more, for me, it's more important, the other ones. This particular track needed a lot of like roomy kind of big kind of stuff. So, but typically I don't really use a lot of room if you want a cleaner sound. So yeah, there you go. Hopefully that helps. I was a complete moron, and now I'm not. And that's the best I can do with this. Sometimes, you know, you can look at your old tracks and stuff like that and try and fix them. And there is no fixing them. And it's mostly because the mic placement where they were, you're getting weird artifacts and stuff off the walls and stuff. Fortunately, my room is pretty dead, so I can manipulate stuff. But this is how to get, you know, the most focused sound of everything going forward at once and everything come backwards at once through the speakers. All right. Have fun.